Okay, so from defense to our final concluding topic of this trilogy of brief debates, we'll talk about competitiveness. Sinead O'Sullivan, please, from the Harvard Business School, back to the stage. You would have heard her and seen her earlier today. And also Mathias Link, the Deputy CEO of the Luxembourg Space Agency, too. Hi, guys. Hello. I might swap sides of the table this time. So we're here to discuss innovative and competitive Europe. We spoke in advance about all the various questions that sparks, right? Sinead, I would like to be provocative and start with you in the context of what we've read in the Draghi report, what we've seen spoken about at this conference here today, and the broader conversations that play ahead of the CM25. Is the current architecture of Europe's space policy system, principally ESA also with the EU, is it really fit to meet the challenges in its current form that we face?
Ooh. I feel like I'm in trouble for answering this question. Look, I think this question really potentially is asking us to ask another question. Not that your question was no good. But really is, what are we trying to compete, or who are we trying to compete against? So we can't say, yeah, we're ultra competitive. Well, against who and for what? Are we competitive against the US and China? No, okay, yes. Step one is admitting we have a problem. Are we competitive against some of the other stakeholders? Potentially. And when we think about the European architecture, some stuff is working really, really well. Some stuff is not working that well. And I don't think, as a kind of European set of kind of industries and organizations that we ever have the conversation around what isn't working and how can we change that. Now, earlier I asked the question, who here in a year thinks that NASA will still be around? And some people kind of half put up their hand. Who here in a year thinks that ESA will still be around?
Less people in the room.
There are less people in the room, you're right.
Yeah.
But nearly 100% of the people here believe that ESA will still be here in a year. There might be something wrong with that answer as well. And is that driving competitiveness, the fact that we are so sure that these institutions are going to be here forever? So I don't know, maybe not. Maybe our architecture is not quite correct at the minute.
I'm going to put you on the spot as well, Mathias. What do you think? Will ESA still be here in a year? And what needs to maybe have a rethink in terms of our architecture of space policy making?
So I hope that ESA will still be here in a year and even a few years afterwards. I think we, as Luxembourg, we use ESA as our space agency, as our technical agency for implementing our national space program. And that works extremely well. We have optimized that program to be fast, to be much quicker than many other programs that ESA delivers. So we definitely want to keep ESA at least for that program.
It gives you a good benchmark, makes you look good.
For the rest, of course, my feeling is that overall we know quite well what works and what doesn't work in Europe, and we just need to do it. And of course, doing things, changing things, depends a lot on us, on the institutions, on the member states, on ESA, on the European Union, but it also depends on things that we cannot really control, that are out of our control in Europe. For example, the drive towards more nationalism in the different countries. My feeling is that over the years, countries look more and more about themselves. It was always the case, but it's especially the case in this geopolitical environment that we're in. So we need to realize that if we want to be a space power as Europe, we need to think again more European. We have another issue, and that's not a space issue. It's the issue of not having enough venture capital in Europe and not enough private investments. This is not a space issue in itself. It's just a European issue, and we need to deal with it.
You brought me perfectly to the issue that I think was going to take up a lot of our conversation today, because I suppose also, Sinead, it's an issue that at the Harvard Business School is something that's discussed a lot in the context of many sectors.
Money, you mean?
Yeah,
we never talk about money at the business school.
European competitiveness, right? The absence of a real venture capital scene in Europe to rival that in the States. Is it a fixable problem?
Is it a fixable problem? It's certainly a problem. So why is it a problem, and then is that fixable? I guess capital markets in Europe are just so different to the US. In the US, I mean, culturally, Europe is full of kind of old money, right? And the people that, you know, kind of are stewards of that old capital, well, their role at the minute is to protect that capital. Maybe it was made several generations before you inherited it. Your only job is to make sure you do not squander it. In the US, it's very different. Your job is to multiply that money. It's new money, and you know, you might be the first generation, second generation to have it. So this kind of creates this risk appetite in the US that doesn't exist in Europe. Is it possible for Europeans to become more risk interested? Yeah, anything is possible. But that would require massive shifts in culture and what we've done for a long time. Maybe the question is not to say how do we take those kind of similar venture capital style financing mechanisms from the US and replicate them here, but Europe is home to some of its own mechanisms that are not prominent in the US. And one of the biggest, I guess, mechanisms that I think we've been sleeping on for the last decade are family offices. Investment structures that can be, you know, I guess family offices can create investments through structures that are very different to typical venture capital. And those structures are exactly the long-term types of investment mechanisms that the space industry could and should use. So maybe it's not that we are totally lacking in one thing, but we have something else and we haven't quite figured out how to use it properly.
And I think Luxembourg definitely, thanks a great deal to also Etienne Schneider in the audience today, Luxembourg has been thinking about innovative ways to engage with the space industry, considering the relatively small size of the country, and you don't have a launch pad, obviously, but still, this has been an ongoing conversation for quite some time. And Mathias, how do you go about thinking about that? What are the opportunities?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we are indeed a small country. It's not a surprise. We cannot compete in absolute terms with our budgets. That's pretty clear. So we have tried to do it differently, and I think some of the models, at least, that you see in the US, or the mindset that you see, we have also replicated it in Luxembourg, and with some success. We have a space policy that is very much commercially oriented. That's how we started back in the 1980s with the creation of SES, which is a major success story, of course, for our space sector. And we have always had this very strong commercially mindset, and that's already a difference with respect to many other regions, is that you think commercially. When we support a company, the first thing we look at is the business plan. And we need to see at least a chance that this company will make revenues on commercial markets. And we know it's tough, and we also have companies in Luxembourg that live from public budgets, but these are not the ones we want and not the ones we like, and we do our very best to help them to address commercial markets and to look at sound business plans. So I think that's really key, is to have this business mindset when you start supporting space companies. The second is speed. We have tried to optimize all our programs, including those that we do together with ESA, to be quick and as fast as possible, so that and with less administrative burden. And of course, yeah, there's still things that can be optimized, but I think that's definitely the way to go. And then overall, what we do in Luxembourg is to look at the overall ecosystem, what the companies need. So they need, of course, R&D support. They need R&D support, they need ESA EU, but they also need private investors. So we have a strong relationship now with the few venture capital funds that we have in Luxembourg and in Europe. Then they need legal and regulatory certainty to launch their missions, and also fast. We have 2 space laws in Luxembourg. They need public research, they need talent. The workforce has been mentioned, and is also part of our agreement with ESPI. This is absolutely key. We start very early in Luxembourg to develop the space in primary schools, high schools, up to university, where we have space masters. So it's really an overall ecosystem that you need, where companies feel safe. And I think at least some of the things we do in Luxembourg could also be replicated in Europe at a larger scale.
Can I just add something kind of controversial to that? So I agree with you. Luxembourg is a really, like, it's a standout success, especially for its size. I wonder, you know, when you were talking about how Luxembourg is a fairly new space player, but a very strong one, how much of that is because you don't have this historical context? You've kind of been able to leapfrog all of, you know, let's say what France, Germany, some other larger space nations have done in the past. You didn't have that, and you're able to go straight into private market commercialization. So, you know, one question is how much of the industry that we say is good and that should make us relevant as European space power is actually holding us back? Please don't kill me. Airbus, I hope you're not here.
Yeah, for us at least, what worked is having this commercial mindset, and what helps, of course, is that you see this major shift of space becoming more and more commercial. We started in the satellite communications industry, which was, of course, the first part of space that was truly commercial, nearly from the very start, and that gave us confidence that with time, other space areas like Earth observation, navigation, and even now exploration are becoming much more commercial. And so we are just applying basically what we have always done to now these other areas. And one thing that was especially important for us is to have this vision. And that was also mentioned, I think, during the whole day. Many panelists talked about developing a strong vision for Europe and leapfrogging and not just catching up. And we have a perfect example in Luxembourg with the Space Resource Initiative, which was really a total leapfrog for us, because we started with a totally blank sheet. In 2016, we had nothing in exploration, and it worked. We launched a rover towards the moon in January this year. Unfortunately, it was a hard landing, but okay. It was a first try, we'll try again.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
we did this in a very short time frame, and it was a mix of having the right environment for companies to thrive, but also a mix of having this strong vision and believing in it. And I'm convinced that this is what we need in Europe, and it has been said by many speakers before.
It's somehow difficult to define in terms of how vision would galvanize resources to meet that vision. But is this something that you would agree with, that there needs to be a target, an end game, an objective, a vision?
Well, yeah, no, 100%. I'm not you know, I spend a lot of time talking about European space. I myself am not entirely sure what every stakeholder I meet means when they say we're going to be X, Y, or Z. And it's talking about galvanizing and creating a vision. I mean, who here has ever lived or worked in the US? I mean, it's quite a small number of people, yet this is our, you know, we're trying to compete, supposedly, with the US. How on earth do we do that if we don't know what good in the US looks like, and we're trying to beat their version of good with some version of ours? And so the vision is certainly one aspect that confuses me. I mean, any good strategy and competitiveness stems from, you know, having a vision and alignment on that. And, you know, again, it goes back to knowing where are we today, and I guess having some honesty about that. And then really being able to know where we're even trying to get to. If you speak to space leadership in Europe, they will tell you, we are a space power. Okay.
You disagree?
Yeah, I think that's fictional. Yeah. Completely fictional. Sorry, Ludwig. Ignore everything that you see right behind me. No, I do. I think it's fictional. I think it's aspirational for sure. But in terms of creating a viable way of getting there, let's not pretend that we're already there. We're just maintaining that.
At the moment in Brussels, the Draghi report, to a lesser extent, but still a similar theme, the letter report, they have taken on almost biblical significance. And everybody references them all the time. They diagnose huge problems, also then big targets and objectives for what should be done. But if we could distill here now very quickly what a competitive landscape for European space to build Europe as a space power would be. Money is clearly one thing. I have always wondered if Europe is just critically troubled by the fact that it's competing countries, therefore competing industries, therefore competing interests at every summit. And this will always drag on the ability of Europe to seriously compete. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I mean, we will never compete with the US and China when France is trying to compete with Germany. What is the point?
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you look at budgeting, when you look at internal resourcing, oh my God, it's the most boring thing in the world, procurement. But, I mean, we can learn a lot from that. Once you remove if you were to remove, I mean, look at the Chinese model. They compete ferociously at the state level, then the regional level, then at the country level. And only then, when they have extreme competitiveness at the country level, will they allow that technology to compete outside of China. Well, what we do in Europe is we say, here's a startup that's raised 5 million euros. Now go compete with SpaceX in the US. I mean, of course this is not going to work. But we do not allow competition between and within Europe properly, because it's kind of governed by archaic rules of every country wants its own launch pad and this and that and the other. So like Luxembourg, I think, is taking a very different route with this.
We try to do our best on our level, but I agree with your analysis. I mean, in the end, we have to stop, in a certain sense, we have to stop competing between ourselves in Europe and think European again and try to do more things together. Again, we hear the same messages since years, so I have always the feeling that we know where we stand and we also know what needs to be done, but then the message should be just do it.
Yeah.
Maybe we start in the middle this time. Any questions? Torsten has a question. Is there a microphone?
There's a question.
Whereabouts?
Just there.
Yeah, just Torsten.
Torsten, yeah.
The front.
Thank you. I'm just getting warm. So, question about the military budgets that we are seeing that are rising. What is great on one hand side, because it pushes space. And Mathias, you mentioned something I would like to pick up here: the space education for the next generations. So, how much of the military spending are we putting into research and development on the various levels to talk about dual-use research or military research and development? So what would be a fair number that we are not in 10 years running against the wall and say, oh, nobody knows how to do the next big thing here?
As much as possible?
Pick a number.
You mean for Luxembourg especially, or in total? I don't know, frankly. I can only tell you that we are definitely pushing for more dual use and for more military spending, including in ESAR and in our civil programs. But it's tough, and from what I hear, it's also difficult in many other countries. It's not necessarily something that we're used to do. Maybe in larger countries, they have done it since a while. But for smaller, medium-sized countries, this is still very new.
Any questions on this side of the room here? Anybody spy a hand? Here, at the back of the middle.
Thank you. Firstly, also for the panel, but so my question here is, oftentimes the topic of space education indeed comes up. And I feel like, generally speaking, that the technical side of things is very much developed already. But there's a lack, at least from my perspective, of education for other subjects that ties into space, such as policy and law and whatnot. And what I see, my focus is space law specifically, is that there's only a very limited amount of institutions that have courses in space law. There's Luxembourg, Leiden, and whatnot. And how do you think we can overcome the fact that there's very few institutions that actually do give space-focused education, while also because of the fact that those institutions have tuition fees that are exorbitant, essentially, which means that only very specific, let's say, parts of society can then go into space. So yeah, that would be my question. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to disagree with the first part of your question, and I'll tell you why. So I'm a professor of engineering in the US, and I've spent most of my career in large institutions in the US. And what happens there, so if we take launch, for example, what happens in the US is that all of my students will have built 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 rockets. And when I mean rockets, like, I'm on the board of the MIT Rocket Club. Their last rocket went, 35 kilometers into space. 135 kilometers. These are very impressive. So by the time these students go into work, I guess, as an engineer, they're all going to SpaceX. They're all going to Anduril, Palantir. They've built shit already, like multiple times. And I spent about 6 months last year calling, like literally picking up the phone and phoning every damn university I could find that had any sort of engineering, and spoke to the people that were, the students that is, that were in their clubs, that were building stuff. And students in Europe do not build stuff. So when you have students that are not, so another good question, I mean, this is primarily a policy group, sure, but like who in this room has touched hardware or has ever coded part of a rocket engine before? Every room I ask that question to, no one answers, because no one in Europe has done that. Yet we somehow will build the technology of the future. I think the first part of your question is actually wrong. I don't think we have the technical capability. We lie about this all the time to ourselves, because we have students that graduate with 4.0, whatever the equivalent is, GPAs, from top universities in Europe frequently. But they come out of university never having touched hardware. So these are not the people that are going to be building next generation missiles, hypersonics, supersonics, launch vehicles, okay? Then, once you have those people, everything else becomes much more urgent. The law, the policy, the finance, love the money. But I think the first part has to come first. I think we're still not there on the first part. I don't know enough about space law to answer the second part of that question, sorry.
I tend to disagree a bit on the fact that we don't have the right people. I think we have excellent universities and engineering schools in Europe. And so we have the people. And I think we need to maybe also consider that many people don't need to study space to work in space. And I have no space background. I studied something else. And so I think there's a lot to do in the workforce part to increase awareness about space, and also tell the younger people and the graduates about the opportunities in the space sector, and also take away the fear that some of them still have, like space is rocket science and we cannot go there, that's too complicated, which is definitely not the case.
That's literally the message that most schools are pumping into kids, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And the thing is that very often also what I hear is that, okay, the space sector is so specific and is so special and different from all the other sectors, and it's much more complicated, but that's not true, actually. There are other sectors that have the same type of complication, the same type of overregulation, administrative burden, and frankly, there are many similarities between the space sector and other sectors, and that's, again, I think where we can learn a lot by drawing these bridges between different sectors, and that's also one way then to attract more people into space. About space lawyers specifically, well, I'm not a lawyer. I think some lawyers help, some others don't. So I'm not sure exactly how much lawyers we need. But again, you don't need to be a specific space lawyer to work in space law. You can have a normal law studies and then transition towards space.
But just bringing it back to competitiveness, I mean, sure, we can talk all day. I'm gonna argue against your point, arguing against my point, arguing against his point. We can talk about space law and policy all day, every day. In Europe, that's actually what we're really good at doing. I'm not sure, but I think some of the best space law programs in the world are in Europe. Ask the people who wrote GDPR. They're really talented. The problem is, though, space law does not a SpaceX make. And in Europe, we're really good at figuring out what's working, law, regulations, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yep, great, let's double down on that. But that's what got us here. I think, again, if you go and try and speak to, and rocket science is hard. I'm sorry, why are we telling people it's not? It is hard. That's why we train for it. That's why you build rockets at college. That's why we finance rocketry clubs. That's why we have competitions. It's hard, I'm sorry. If you can, like, you know, but it's worth it. It's fun. It's just a very, this is a pet peeve of mine, because I think that we tell people that we can be competitive and regulate our way out of building stuff, and we can't. So let's.
For maximum fairness, has anybody got a question on this side of the room? One right there in the middle.
Not so much a question, but I have to stand up for my alma mater, the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands, and we do build rockets there. So, yes. I'm, by the way, Alexandra Zijlstra from TNO, the Netherlands Research, Institute for Applied Research, and we do build stuff there as well. Research part, because we let industry do the real work in the end. We're not there to compete, we're there to do research and work together on science. So that was just not a question, just a remark, because I don't like to have Europe put down to the ground while we are really doing cool stuff here as well. Thank you.
Have you got a question, or anybody else with a question? No, that's...
So I'd like to thank you for that. I'd like to clarify, it's not that Europe doesn't have people that do this. I personally finance a university rocket club because and there are people building and doing that, of course. What I mean is that there is no institutional pathway, the way that exists in the US, to create an industry of people that are creating the technologies that we need of tomorrow. And it really doesn't matter at what stage or in which part of academic or non-academic science and engineering that you're in. It has to, we live in an age where it has to be competitive. And research that it does not prove its worth in terms of ROI, IP creation, etc., is being phased out. I was talking earlier about the number of PhDs at Harvard University across science are down this year 70%. They're not being financed anymore. So the most competitive institutions in the world, in the most competitive departments, are losing 70% of their budget. So there's no part of science that can afford to no longer be competitive.
Why is that, though? You would have thought now it's a very good time. You would have thought that the incentive would be there because major companies would want to give elite universities money to have students.
I think academia in the US is facing a very difficult period because of the current administration. I think that's one part of it. I think also that universities that have relied philanthropically to create large academic programs like Harvard's endowment are now realizing when they go through the numbers, what can we afford to keep, or what can we afford to lose versus keep, that the way they've to date been measuring academic output of some of these PhDs has not, that they're cutting the programs.
Okay, just before I close it out and put you both on the spot with a question, I would like to know from both of you, what do you think the one thing, I know this is kind of a silly question, but the one thing Europe could do in the next 3 months that would unlock the maximum potential? Just want to return, Mathias, to you with the thing about education, because I think this is a very novel point that I haven't heard spoken about much or enough, is maybe the answer to all of these questions about competitive lies in a generation that is currently in school, and that if you deprive them of real hands-on experience of using rocketry at a very basic sense, and at least the area of this kind of science, then you're never going to create a competitive labor market and the innovation needed to really compete. When was this decision taken in Luxembourg, and is this something that you're promoting to other countries?
You mean talent development?
Yeah, and also you said at the beginning going into schools and making sure kids are learning a little bit about space.
Well, we've always been doing it a bit, but it became really clear when we launched the Space Resources Initiative again, because this is so far. It's a more longer-term view, and it's not very developed yet. So it was very clear that we needed to develop the younger generation to think in that direction, and that's how we then started having specific courses, both at university level and in high school, specifically on that topic. But then very quickly we noticed that there was a larger need to develop the talent development chain from the primary schools up to university and beyond. And so it's really now one of our key activities next to supporting industry is developing the talent. And I can agree with what you just said. They need really hands-on experiences. I think this is key to get them the experience also building stuff. And I can give one example. We have a replicated initiative that was originally taken by the Portuguese Space Agency, by Ricardo, who was there just before, launching youngsters on a parabolic flight and giving them a kind of astronaut experience. And we have continued to develop that model into a full-scale competition that we just had over the past months, where we had 500 youngsters between 13 and 18 years old that went through a virtual astronaut selection process. So they had to apply, they had to do physical tests, logical tests, they had to do interviews, and then they went through a sort of space camp where they learned about space and about opportunities. And then at the end, after several selection processes, they were allowed to fly on that parabolic flight. And by the way, this year we did it together with Austria and with Estonia, so it became a sort of mini European initiative as well. And afterwards, so you get like 30 youngsters that are super motivated about space, and they all look forward to space studies afterwards. But on top of that, we use them as our ambassadors, going into the schools and talking about space and promoting space. And it works really well. I mean, you really motivate the next generation, and you give them a sort of little vision on what it is to work in the space sector.
Imagine. Okay, so the final one thing to close it out, Sinead, what would be that thing?
Sorry, anything?
Competitiveness booster. Europe.
Yeah, again, no one's going to enjoy this one. I think if we really got serious, we decided one day we wanted to make European space a thing, we would get rid of the Ariane project, and we would get rid of contracts, government contracts to legacy space players. And I think only then will innovative, actually competitive companies grow in their place that can compete outside of Europe as well as inside of Europe.
That'd be quite a significant change to how Europe has done business.
And that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Matthias, what's the big competitive?
So much was said, so it's difficult to pick one thing out, but I would just do it. I mean, we talk a lot about administrative simplification, less bureaucratic procedures, quicker procurement. I think that's something where that definitely needs to be done. We need to listen to companies, support them, especially those with good business plans, and then really make sure they get the kickstart money that they need as fast as possible.
Excellent. All right, then thank you, Sinead, Matthias. The audience could join me in thanking you both.